Moving swiftly on, the final item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number S4M 06190 in the name of Joan-McAlpine on a national tree. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I would invite those members who wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. Ms McAlpine, if you are ready. Just trying to find you. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I was lucky enough to spend this morning at Butterdean Wood in East Lothian with a group of delightful 4- and 5-year-olds from the Compass School in Haddington. With the help of the Woodland Trust, who own Butterdean, the children planted Scots pine saplings with me to highlight this debate. The trusts are in the gallery today, along with representatives of the Scottish Woodlot Association, Scottish Environmental Link, the RSPB, the Borders Forest Trust. They all support the campaign for a national tree, as do Trees for Life, the Scottish Wildlife Trust, the John Muir Trust and the Royal Scottish Forestry Society. It was wonderful to share the children's excitement today. Woodlands are the most stimulating playgrounds of all, and there was much chatter about whether we might spot a gruffalo. Apparently it was lying low today, but they did have a great time with their saplings and spades. Woodlands foster a sense of well-being for people of all ages, as is scientifically proven. In fact, the Scottish Forestry Commission has a very successful project called Branching Out that offers patients a therapeutic programme of activities, from simply walking in the woods to building bird boxes and clearing rhododendron. As a child, I was of the generation that planted a tree in '73. It was a massive UK drive to make good the devastation of Dutch elm disease. I still remember the excitement of getting our very own sapling. There were very few trees at that time in our housing scheme, which was made up of 1950s pebble dash houses, typical of post-war urban Scotland. Now the trees we planted are mature, as unfortunately am I, but the greenery has transformed Midton and Gourock into something of a leafy suburb. Trees give a sense of place and of permanence. Perhaps it was this childhood memory that attracted me to Alex Hamilton's petition calling on this Parliament to, I quote, urge the Scottish Government as a symbolic commitment to our woodlands and natural heritage to proclaim the Scots pine as the national tree of Scotland. I would point out that this demand is non-political. We are asking for a national tree, not a nationalist tree. So I would welcome the Minister's clarification of the Civil Servants' letter to the Petitions Committee, which seemed to suggest that we must await the outcome of the referendum next year before making a decision. Scotland is already a nation, and we can choose appropriate symbols whenever we want. We already have the saltire and the thistle, of course. This year of Natural Scotland is an ideal time to name our nation's tree. I must admit that I originally myself thought that legislating on this matter was a bit like using a sledgehammer to crack a pine cone, if you pardon the pun. However, around the world it does seem that is how it's done. The maple was only proclaimed the official tree of Canada in 1996, and in the United States there were 3 resolutions in the House and Senate before a bill was signed by the President in 2003, elevating the oak to the status of the American eagle. So what is the point of a national arboreal emblem, as they prefer to call it across the Atlantic? Well, it gets people talking, and if that talk leads to action in preserving and planting woodland, it can help combat climate change. Global forest cover dropped from 50% to 30% of the world's land area in the last century, and I know that this government has a very ambitious target for planting, so any interest that helps support that objective has to be good. Woodland also supports wildlife. The Galloway Forest Park in my own region is home to red kite, barn owls and golden eagles. The remnants of the ancient Caledon forest further north shelter the capercaillie, the unique Scottish crossbill and mammals such as the pine marten. And of course the red squirrel, which we all love, survives in pockets across Scotland thanks to our forest. Woodlands are vital to the rural economy. The forestry industry is an economic success story that we don't shout about often enough, and I know that the Minister was as impressed as me with the advanced technology at the James Jones sawmill in Lockerbie when we visited a few months ago. Woodlands are vital to tourism. They form the backdrop to increasingly popular activity holidays. The Seven Stains mountain bike trails in the Borders in Dumfries and Galloway are a great example of this growth area. Thinking globally for a moment, Designating a national tree would also help the country enhance its international brand, which is, of course, already very strong, but there's no reason why we can't strengthen it further. The Scots pine, to me, seems ideal for this purpose. It's named after us, at least in the English-speaking world, and unlike the birch and the oak, it has not been claimed by anyone else. Aesthetically, its strong silhouette lends itself to graphic reproduction and, of course, features in many famous paintings and photographs of Scotland's landscape. It came top of the Woodland Trust online poll to find a national tree, and I can exclusively reveal that it is the front-runner in a separate poll currently being conducted by the Royal Botanical Gardens in Edinburgh for the Year of Natural Scotland. The Scottish Forestry Commission's submission to the Petitions Committee noted that its image is the most downloaded image from its website. The Scots pine has many legendary properties, and it was planted on the graves of fallen Celtic warriors in ancient times. But it is also modern. It comes in many guises. It can be tall and straight or broad and spreading with multiple trunks. The bark ranges in colour from orange-red to grey. So although its presence here goes back to the Ice Age, it is a perfect representative of the diverse modern Scotland today in all its variety. It also encourages a unique biodiversity, and I would recommend, if anyone wants to know more about it, to consult the Trees for Life website, which talks about the Scots pine canopy, encouraging things like blaeberries and cowberries, and even rare orchids in the shades of the trees. The Scots pine is iconic. It does not grow naturally elsewhere in the UK or indeed Ireland, yet it's the most widely distributed conifer in the world, stretching from Scandinavia to southern Spain and from Ardnamurchan to eastern Siberia. It therefore evokes the Scottish human diaspora, which is also scattered widely. It would therefore be a perfect ambassador for a country whose people have made such a mark on this world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you indeed. Now call on Patricia Ferguson to be followed by Rod Campbell. We're quite tight for time, so 4-minute speeches, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I begin by thanking Joan-McAlpine for securing this debate on this interesting proposal. And may I also apologise to Joan-McAlpine and to the Chamber that other business requires me to leave after I've made my contribution this evening. I would also want to recognise the hard work and commitment of my constituent, Alec Hamilton, who, with the help of many of the organisations mentioned earlier, has championed this issue through the processes of the Petitions Committee, and whose determination will, I hope, bear fruit. Mr Hamilton sadly can't be with us today, as ironically he is on one of the few places in Scotland with no trees, the island of St Kilda. I have to say, though, to Joan McAlpine that those of us on this side are perhaps not as surprised as she was that a decision on the National Tree of Scotland must await the outcome of the referendum. After all, doesn't everything these days? But Scotland has a national flower, so why not a national tree? 70 other countries have already adopted a national tree, and some have even emblazoned their tree on their national flag. Now, we're a country proud of and famed for our natural heritage, and our scenery helps to promote Scotland as a tourism destination, and it is always one of the first things people from overseas remark upon when you say that you come from Scotland. And of course, as our fame as an outdoor sports destination grows, so too does that picture of Scotland grow in the memories and the minds of those who have visited. I think it would be fitting if there was a tangible legacy from the Year of Natural Scotland in the form of a national tree. And I sincerely hope that the Scottish Government will agree to formally recognising such an iconic image for our country. When researching for this debate, I noted that Wikipedia boldly asserts that the Scots pine is the national tree of Scotland. And while we know that that's not quite true, it is interesting that that assumption is made. And frankly, I think it's an understandable assumption. And if any tree can symbolise the vision of Scotland's wild places that most people have, it must be the Scots pine. And the fact that, as Joan McAlpine recognised, it comes in many sizes, shapes and colours, perhaps does chime with our vision of a diverse Scotland in the modern world. Now, the pine would definitely be my own choice, but it would also be the choice, as Joan-McAlpine has again said, of those who took part in the Woodland Trust's online poll. Some 66% of those who participated opted for the Scots pine, with only 20% choosing the rowan, the next most popular. So it would seem that the Scots pine is certainly the favourite for that iconic role. Although I would agree with the motion that public consultation should take place before a decision were made to award the accolade to any particular tree. Deforestation over the years means that it is not such a common tree now as it once was. Over the last 300 years particularly, swathes of the trees were cleared to make way for crops, and the tree was in great demand as a source of pit props to the mining industry and for other industrial purposes. It is a hardy tree and can be found in many countries in Northern Europe, although it does venture as far south as Portugal and has a lifespan of between 150 to 300 years, although I do understand that there are some specimens in Sweden that are believed to be 700 years old. And the Scots pine can be grown commercially, but it is also an important part of our ecosystem. Many plants, birds, animals and insects depend upon it. Indeed, I am indebted to Mr Hamilton, who in his petition provided very interesting information about the Scottish crossbill, a bird which lives only in pine forests and which feeds on the scales of the pine cone. Now, whether or not the Scots pine is recognised as our national tree, I would argue that it is already an iconic symbol of our country, and I would hope that the Scottish Government would recognise that and give it the recognition it deserves.
Thank you very much. I will now call on Rod Campbell to be followed by Annabel Goldie. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. May I first of all congratulate Joan-McAlpine for securing a debate on this subject and, like her, welcome those visitors from the Woodland Trust and the Public Gallery tonight to hear our debate on this subject. In Scotland, those of us who want independence for our nation have always said it's not about flags, anthems and symbols. However, that's not to say that symbols have no significance. Symbols can serve to strengthen a nation's identity in many ways, historically and culturally in particular, or as a simple logo. Who could mistake the symbolic eagles of the United States or Germany, which have become unquestionable markers on dollars and on the euro coin, German euro coin, respectively? Who could mistake the Welsh dragon or the Welsh leek? And who could deny that the maple tree is inextricably linked to Canada? In the latter case, the Canadian brand and the maple brand complement each other. When we think of maple syrup, we think of Canada and vice versa. Scotland is one of the oldest nations in Europe, and we have put our fair share of symbols, and we have our fair share of symbols. To name but a few, Scotland can be identified by the lion rampant, the thistle, the unicorn and the heather. At least 3 of those things are heraldic symbols, symbols connected with royalty or privilege, which arguably have much less influence today and significance. In the digital age in which we now live, symbols can easily be transmitted and identified. I certainly don't subscribe to the view that a nation can have too many symbols. Indeed, the more the merrier. There is a good reason for having them. New symbols can bolster identity and a unique brand, something we shouldn't shy away from in a globalised and increasingly homogeneous world, particularly when the value of local non-commercialised produce is being rediscovered by the public, for whom the once attractive mass-produced brand names are losing their charm. To me, it is clear that there is clearly a strong case being made for Scotland to formally adopt the Scots pine. In my own constituency of North East Fife, Tentsmuir Forest and Tentsmuir National Nature Reserve border the coast between St Andrews and Lucas. The area comprises some 50 square miles of woodland, which is predominantly made up by Scots pine and Corsican pine. Tentsmuir is perhaps one small pocket of something close to the ancient Caledonian pine forest habitat, which once covered enormous swathes of Scotland, but has sadly, yet often inevitably, disappeared due to a combination of natural and man-made factors, most notably the clearance of woodland over the centuries for livestock grazing. Tentsmuir Forest is owned by the Forestry Commission, and the reserve is looked after by the Scottish Natural Heritage. The area is used frequently by students of biology and geology at St Andrews University due to its rich biodiversity, preserved and restored sand dunes. The trees themselves are home to a fascinating range of insects and birds, many of which are only found in Scotland and a few other places. Of course, we know that in other parts of Scotland, Scots pine forms part of the woodland and the home for some of our rarest and most fascinating animals. And there is also a home there for the capercaillie. Without the environment provided by Scots pine forests, the Capercaillie population, which is currently descended from a reintroduction from Sweden, would once again possibly become extinct. Presiding Officer, it may be cliched, but the Scots pine is an inextricable part of Scotland's rugged, mountainous beauty with which this country is identified, for better or for worse, around the world. I know that the round tree has its admirers. Some of us will remember the First Minister a few years ago making a vocal rendition of the round tree on the CD. But notwithstanding that, I'm sure that in adopting the Scots pine as our natural tree, it would only serve to strengthen the Made in Scotland brand. And given the prevalence of the species in every part of Scotland, I think it's right that it should be called our national tree. I hope the Scottish Government will give this further consideration, and I thank Joan-McAlpine once again for bringing this debate to the Chamber.
Thank you very much. I now call on Annabel Goldie to be followed by Mike McKenzie. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I too thank Joan McAlpine for bringing this motion to the Parliament? As someone who loves the countryside and wildlife, I am very supportive of any initiative which recognises and seeks to promote our distinctive and beautiful Scottish environment. So I am not unsympathetic to the concept of a national tree for Scotland, although perhaps Ms McAlpine should not be too wafted away by this endorsement, and I shall explain why. I have form when it comes to promoting national things, and while that may have stopped short of the Scottish National Party, it did extend some years ago to promoting a national bird for Scotland, and I was asked to take under my wing, as it were, promotion of the golden eagle. At that time, the Scotsman newspaper, in conjunction with the RSPB, asked a number of people to adopt different birds, culminating in a poll in 2004, which the golden eagle won. Now, I hope the Chamber will indulge me in recounting this cautionary tale, because it is instructive to any desire to establish a national tree. On the back of that poll victory, a petition backed by the RSPB was presented to the Petitions Committee of this Parliament to establish the golden eagle as our national bird. And in November of 2004, the committee decided to write to the then Scottish Executive to clarify the process for establishing a national bird. And the months passed. In June 2005, the committee agreed to approach the relevant minister, expressing concern at the lack of a response. And the months passed. In January 2006, some response must have been received, because the committee went back to the petitioner. In September 2006, the committee referred the petition to the Enterprise and Culture Committee. In October 2006, the Enterprise and Culture Committee took evidence and agreed to write to the Lord Lyon, the then Minister for Tourism, Culture and Sport, and to visit Scotland to seek views on what effect the establishment of a national bird would have on tourism. I'd have thought the self-evident answer was pretty damn good, but never mind. On 5th December 2006, the Enterprise Committee agreed to take no further action on the petition, notify the petitioners and inform the Public Petitions Committee of the decision. Certainly.
McAlpine.
I thank the member for taking an intervention and for arming me with that kind of evidence, which I'm sure will be very useful in future. Is she aware that it took 3 goes in the American Senate to get, in the House, to get the American tree through, and all 3 occasions those attempts were held up in committee? So I think if the Americans can eventually get there, maybe we can as well.
Well, I am encouraged by what Ms McAlpine says. There's certainly a lesson in not being thwarted by adversity. I have to say the final note was, before dismissing this petition, the Enterprise Committee agreed to write to the Scottish Executive to ask for clarification on the process and procedure for establishment of a national symbol, which, interestingly, was pretty much what the Petitions Committee had done initially more than 2 years previously. The golden eagle is still not the national bird of Scotland. Now, this sorry tale is not to discourage, but to outline the pitfalls. And I think Joan McAlpine has been wise to keep her motion non-specific in relation to the type of tree, although her speech perhaps was a little more partisan. And I think it's also important that neither the proposal nor the ultimate tree, if such there is, be claimed by any one party. This is only going to work if there is cross-party and broad-based support. What I would observe is that accepting a principle is only the start of a long and tortuous journey. And from my experience, there needs to be careful thought given to process. It has to involve wide public consultation. And I think it has to embrace public comment on the principle. Because if the public doesn't want a national tree, the game's a bogey. But if the public is supportive, there are other issues to clarify. The Lord Lyon may have views about this. There will need to be some mechanism by poll of constituting a short list of suitable trees and then inviting a national vote to establish a winner. But, Deputy Presiding Officer, if we can do it to decide the name of a bridge over the Forth, surely we can do it to decide the name of a national tree. And in conclusion, would it be too much to hope that one day the golden eagle might sit on that tree as our national bird? Because I just might have to make that a prerequisite of my continuing support.
Thank you very much for that unusual imagery. Now call on Mike Mackenzie to be followed by Jean Urquhart, please.
Presiding Officer, I'm pleased to speak in this debate as a means of helping to raise the profile of this wonderful tree, the Scots pine. For some, it's the little white rose of Scotland that breaks the heart. For me, it's the Scots pine. I've yet to see one that didn't look just right in its setting. They hold my view and they captivate me as few other trees do, and they brighten my travels across the Highlands and Islands, appearing now and then like old friends. And they make my heart pause and then beat a little bit quicker, and they make me smile. And they look equally good in the rain or mist, in sunshine or in snow, and they grow where few other things will grow. They're resilient and symbolic of the tough and enduring spirit of Scotland. Sad then it is, Presiding Officer, that there are all too few of them left. Sad too that the old Caledonian forest is reduced to 1% of what it once was. Sad on a number of different levels. And we all know the stories of how the Caledonian forest was cut down and cleared for sheep and other reasons. In Argyll, it was burned for charcoal over a 100-year period. Our Argyll woodlands supplied the cannonballs for Nelson's navy. Interestingly, the woodland immediately adjacent to the Bonaw ironworks, although harvested, was also well managed and conserved. But out with this immediate vicinity, it was felled with no thought at all for conservation, and these woodlands have now all gone, destroyed over a huge area. And in their place, we have spruce plantations where timber is exported for a few pounds a tonne, with no local added value, and these days, very few jobs. Man has been replaced by machine, and our local sawmills, unable to invest in new technology, are gone too. Spruce plantations, unfortunately, are deadly for biodiversity. Sad then, in environmental and economic terms, as well as sentimental. Presiding Officer, I have more reasons than most to value this fine tree, for I've used its wood for joists and rafters, for floorboards and for furniture, and it excels in all those uses, being workable, enduring and attractive. I remember the sweet aromatic smell as you cut into it. I remember the pink and creamy hues of newly sawn planks and how gracefully these hues mellow with time. I remember the many pleasant hours I've spent in the company of this wonderful wood and hope to spend again. So, Presiding Officer, to conclude, I can think of no more fitting species than the Scots pine as our national tree. And as I see I've got a few seconds left, I'll perhaps finally conclude on a poetic note. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
Thank you very much. I now call on Jean Urquhart to be followed by Bob Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thanks too to Joan-McAlpine for securing this private member debate. I think that all of us in the Chamber recognise the important role that symbols can play in the lives of the Scottish people. And from the cross of St Andrew on a flag to the thistle on a national rugby jersey, symbols can help unite us across any and all society divides. Since 2013 has been declared the Year of Natural Scotland, it makes sense for the Parliament to add to the collection of this nation's identifiable symbols by selecting a national tree. And I was fascinated that you mentioned that Canada only adopted the maple tree as its national tree in 1996, because I'm sure, like every other Scot, I have relatives in Canada and remember proudly, aged 5 or 6 or something, having the maple leaf and Canada, the words Canada on a wee brooch that I wore. So I can't believe that it's taken them all this time when the rest of the world has recognised that. But I was interested too that as the social media has picked up the idea of the tree, and the Out of Doors programme on Radio Scotland some weeks ago discussed alternatives, the round tree, geans, hawthorns, etc. But there was no doubt that the listeners and the tweets that were going around at the end of that or during that showed that far in the lead was the Scots pine. And it is instantly recognisable. I mean, there really isn't another tree quite like it. It's strong and straight and tall, wily, hardy and independent, just like the Scots themselves. And the small, distinctive copses are photographed endlessly as a real image of Scotland. As a regional member for the Highlands and Islands, can I say that there are many parts of Scotland that I drive through where there are few and sometimes even no trees. But I can also say that if there are any there, they are always Scots pines. They get where none other grows, sometimes growing out of the side of the stone of a mountainside. From a cultural perspective too, I think the Scots pine comes in so many colours and shapes, which helps to symbolise the multicultural nature of Scotland. In Glen Lyon, there's the Scots pine estimated to be 520 years old. And while not as impressive maybe as the Fortingall yew, it still serves as a symbol for the resilience of the Scottish people. There are approximately 75 nations which have either officially recognised or unofficially adopted national trees, and each of the 50 states in the USA has their own state tree. There's therefore no reason, I think, why Scotland cannot join these other nations in recognition of a national tree. And if anybody is in any doubt, I think reading The Cone Gatherers by Robin Jenkins will give them the imagery, the sense of the importance of the forest, literally the seeding and reseeding of the tree, and the importance of the Scots pine in our nation in so many ways. Here's to the Scots pine as our national tree. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I call on Bob Doris to be followed by Alison Johnson.
Presiding Officer, thank you, and can I follow my colleagues in congratulating Joan-McAlpine for securing today's debate, and of course Alex Hamilton, one of my constituents, for submitting the petition which inspired today's debate. Looking at some of the groups and organisations that have backed Mr Hamilton's request, as mentioned already, the RSPB, Trees for Life, the Woodland Trust, Scottish Wildlife Trust, John Muir Trust, and I could go on. Clearly he has a knack of getting people and organisations with similar interests and passions together to achieve change. And I have to say the fact that he's got an unreconstructed city boy speaking in this debate who in earlier years have not particularly paid much attention to nature also shows, I think, the strength of the idea of having a national tree, and I'll say more about that later. Rod Campbell talked about the importance of symbols. As a multinational state, the symbols of the United Kingdom constituent countries tend to be recognised by general public agreement rather than necessarily in any official way. And the example of a national anthem is an obvious one. Flower of Scotland is widely recognised as Scotland's national anthem, although officially we do share, for the moment anyway, God Save the Queen with England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And as along with national anthems, England and the United Kingdom also share a national tree. the pedunculate oak, or the royal oak as it's more commonly known. Now, I know a number of MSPs in this chamber have made representations on behalf of Mr Hamilton, and I am certainly one of those, and to our Minister Paul Wheelhouse. I'm sure we'll hear more from him shortly in relation to how he would wish to take this forward. But just because there's no current mechanism, formal mechanism in place for designating an official national tree, is not a reason not to do it. It can be done and it should be done, and if there's willingness, I'm sure it will be done. I think the process to date has been really constructive, and it's certainly got people thinking about our natural world and to appreciate the wonderful wildlife, the landscape and scenery of Scotland, which is in itself one of our most internationally recognised assets. At times, some of us, and as I said at the start of this debate, including myself, can really quite easily take that for granted. Certainly in previous years, that has been the case. So with Joan McAlpine mentioning the bush to our timber industry, for example, of having a national tree, we've heard others say that it will reinforce Scotland, the brand, but actually I think the process by which we seek to choose a national tree is just as important as the tree that we choose in itself, and that's what I'd like to say a little bit about. Now, I know that the Woodland Trust conducted a poll. We've heard already that in terms of what tree Scots would go for, and that 2/3 went for the Scots pine, with the round coming second. But I understand that the winner got 414 votes, and I absolutely commend the Woodland Trust for taking forward that initiative. But I think we'll be talking about thousands of votes when we take this forward in a structured, engaged way at a national level. And that's the key bit that I would like to talk about. And also, when we do eventually decide on what our national tree will be, why not reaffirm that, say, every 10 years, and let the people decide again if they wish to stay with, if it is the Scots pine, which seems to be the favourite, or whether they wish to replace that. But it's that process, in the time I've got left, Presiding Officer, that I want to talk about. I would see having our school children, for example, deciding what would they prefer. Would they prefer the Scots pine, or would they say actually perhaps it should be the birch, because the birch actually covers twice the area of Scotland than the Scots pine actually does? Or would they reject that because Finland and Russia already have the birches as their national trees? So let's get people talking about it, let's get people engaged with it, and certainly, as I said before, it's starting to get me thinking about something that previously, Presiding Officer, I wouldn't have done so, and I commend Joan McAlpine once again for bringing this to the Chamber this afternoon.
Many thanks. I now call on Alison Johnson, after which we'll move to the closing speech from the Minister.
Okay. Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to congratulate Joan McAlpine for securing time to debate this issue this evening. I'm very pleased to debate this in the Year of Natural Scotland, and to support any initiative to make Scotland greener and any commitment to our woodlands. We've heard from many members today why this is so important, and from many organisations, including the Woodland Trust, the Scottish Wildlife Trust, the Scottish Environment Link and the John Muir Trust. And Mike Mackenzie mentioned earlier that Sitka spruce doesn't support indigenous wildlife, and I think this is a very important step that we can take to ensure that our wildlife has every chance to thrive. But I do hope that this will be more than symbolic. Too recent history has seen the trampling of a site of special scientific interest, one of the most protective of all designations, and I believe that designations and titles should stand for something, should really mean something. If having a national tree brings increased determination to protect our natural spaces and places for their inherent value, then it is right that we should do so. And it's right that we should celebrate a national tree. But while we focus on one tree, we should dwell on the interconnectedness of all our native species. Scotland was once a forest land until human activities stripped it of almost all its ancient woodland. And of course, climatic change and environmental degradation hasn't helped. But we're far richer ecologically, culturally and financially if we increase our commitment to our native woodlands and forests. I really welcome the growing interest in community woodland, and indeed community ownership of woodland, and in the sustainable harvesting of our forests. We're producing timber for some of the most beautiful and sustainable furniture that you could possibly imagine. Mike Mackenzie alluded to that too.
And some of the furniture, houses and objects that are made by our most talented craftspeople really are, these are priceless objects and simply without compare. In recent times, we've had outbreaks of ash dieback and of dotterstroma needle blight, and I think these issues have raised awareness of the fragility of our trees and the importance of our trees and forests, and the need for safe, sustainable, sensible management and commercial practice. And as a member of the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee, I'd also like to highlight concerns that have been raised with me about threats to our forests and woodlands from large-scale biomass. And with a growing human population, tensions over land use will continue, and it's important that we put down markers and state our commitment to our woodland. The state of the world's natural forests is a matter of grave concern, and our native woodlands may be small in global terms, but they are distinctive and unique. Our old pine woods are home to a distinctive range of native species. And the State of Nature report, which has just been published, highlights the perilous state of many species, but there is hope. Awareness is increasing, and if we can increase awareness of the importance of our trees at garden level, at street level, if we can have a renewed focus and discussion about our trees, we can truly transform our neighbourhoods. Tourists flock to visit the Burnham Oak and the Fortingall Yew, as we have heard. The Commonwealth Orchard seeks to see fruit trees in all our streets. Now, I haven't focused today on one tree, and I'm content to let the consultation take its course. But if proclaiming a native tree as the national tree helps to protect and enhance interest in and land devoted to preserving and promoting biodiversity, then I am more than happy to support this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we now move to closing speech from Minister Paul Wheelhouse. 7 minutes, please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm most grateful to members for their valuable contributions during this afternoon's debate. Joan-McAlpine's motion invites us to recognise the significance of the Year of Natural Scotland, and if she will forgive me for paraphrasing, also invites us to create a legacy that would include the declaration of an official national tree after due public consultation. In considering this motion and earlier discussion about Alex Hamilton's public petition on proclaiming Scots pine as a national tree, I have had a number of questions in mind. First, what is a national tree for? Secondly, what does it mean if we decide to adopt a national tree? And thirdly, what process should we go through, as Bob Doris and others have commented, if we were to choose and adopt a national tree? During the course of this, I should say, evening's debate, because it is evening now, we have had several extremely useful contributions that have helped to address these questions. As Joan-McAlpine herself said, and other members have added, the designation of a national tree will help highlight the value we place on our trees, woods and forests. This would reinforce the messages associated with the Year of Natural Scotland, the primary objective of which, of course, is to highlight Scotland's wealth of fantastic natural assets, and trees are obviously a key part of that. My second question is, what would it mean if we were to adopt a national tree? Again, members have helped to answer this question, giving examples of how we could celebrate our national tree, for example, as part of our cultural heritage, for its contribution to our landscape, and in educating children to learn more about the environment in which they live. As part of the Year of Natural Scotland, we have already seen the way in which we have been able to inspire people to take more interest in our wildlife by identifying the Big Five, one of which, of course, is the golden eagle, or at least proposed to be, the otter, the seal, red deer and red squirrel being the others that are being promoted in the SNH app, Big Five app. And of course, Scots pine is a key species amongst the Caledonian native woodlands, which support the red squirrel, pine marten, capercaillie and wildcat, I think, as a number have mentioned. And then, of course, we would need to consider the process for choosing and adopting a national tree. And I feel Annabel Goldie's pain from the process that you've had to go through with regard to the golden eagle. That sounds particularly traumatic. And we would not be the first country to think about these things clearly, as others have identified. For example, like Joan-McAlpine, I do understand that before the President of the United States signed a bill designating the oak as their national tree in 2004, there was indeed a national poll. While Scots pine seems to be the obvious choice for Scotland, and I agree that that is the obvious choice, I can foresee an interesting debate if advocates of Scots pine were forced to defend their choice against proponents who, for the sake of argument, argue that the beauty of the rowan or graceful splendour of the birch also merits a mention. Who knows? Perhaps we should not just have one national tree for Scotland, but perhaps the big three. These are all matters we shall certainly consider in light of the Public Petition Committee's consideration, which we, I understand, expect to receive shortly. However, I feel I also need to inject a less welcome note into these discussions. Indeed, Alison Johnson has touched on this already to a degree. Regretfully, we have to accept the fact that the ash dieback is present in the UK and is likely to spread further. And unfortunately, this is just one of a number of tree health problems Alison Johnson correctly identified that we are facing. We also have Dothystroma needle blight affecting pine trees, including Scots pine, especially in the north and east of the country, and Phytophthora rumorum and larch, mainly in Galloway and Argyllshire. Mortality rates from Dothystroma among Scots pine are alarmingly high and present a real concern to us. In fact, it's higher than for Corsican pine or lodgepole pine. And action plans for these three diseases that I mentioned have been developed by the Scottish Tree Health Advisory Group and are now being implemented. And earlier this week, the Independent Expert UK Task Force on Tree Health and Plant Biosecurity, which includes 3 academics from Scottish universities, published its report on how best to address the tree and plant disease threats that we face. I am now discussing the recommendations with the DEFRA Secretary of State, Owen Paterson, and it's likely we'll meet shortly to discuss this further. There is, however, an important link between tackling tree health and the aspirations behind the idea of designating a national tree for Scotland. This is because awareness raising is an important element in the range of tree health related measures we need to take. And the process of national tree designation could certainly help in making people more aware of the threats and, crucially, what they can do to prevent the diseases spreading, for example, by washing their boots after visiting woodlands for a walk. I do want to pick up a number, in the time I have left, pick up a number of points being raised in the debate and just respond to those. I certainly agree with Joan-McAlpine that our woodlands are very key places to work and to play for children to understand the natural environment around them. And I think it's something that certainly the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Lifelong Learning is keen to explore further, how we develop forest schools, and that's something that I will want to take forward. Patricia Ferguson certainly and Annabel Goldie strongly recommended a process of wide consultation in selecting a national tree, and I certainly take those points on board. Rod Campbell mentioned that new symbols can bolster identity, and a similar point was made, indeed, I think, by Jean Urquhart, that symbols can actually unite rather than divide people, and I think that's an important part about having a national tree, or indeed a national bird, or any other national symbol we might care to mention. The other point, I think, in relation to Mike Mackenzie, I thought very kind of moving references to the use of Scots pine in terms of the construction trade, and clearly the Forestry Commission has an objective to try and extend the amount by which our trees are used for construction and to lock in carbon in building design and try and improve the percentage of our building materials that are formed by timber. But clearly, the key thing is, what will we do to take this process forward? As I say, I'm waiting for the submission from the Petitions Committee. We're very sympathetic to the concept of having a national tree. What I want to see is what recommendations the Petitions Committee, based on the consultation they have done, can give us in terms of the process by which they recommend we go forward in examining this issue. I would hope to be more optimistic that in terms of the timescales, rather than having to wait till the referendum and indeed for Scotland to be independent in March 2016, I would hope that we're talking a much shorter timescale than that should we decide to take forward designation of a national tree. But I certainly welcome today's debate, and can I say, Presiding Officer, that I'm excited about the idea of identifying a national tree for Scotland, and we'll be thinking hard in the light of today's discussions and the committee's deliberations about how best to take this matter forward in a way that makes sure that we can reap the potential benefits of having a national tree, but without incurring any disproportionate costs associated with the designation process itself. And I thank members for their contributions today.
And thank you. And I now close this meeting of Parliament.